More DC Comics custom cards like Dr. Fate, Darkseid, Starro, some more Green Arrow, Joker, and Flash. We got some cool stuff in this video.
Hey buddy, watch this.
That's right, you guys submitted so many amazing custom DC Comics cards. I had to split it into 2 videos. If you missed part 1, you can find it in the description below. But for now, we have 10 more amazing cards to look at, so let's jump into it. Up first here, I have Dr. Fate from Butterscotch. 3-mana, 3/4 Paladin minion with Death Rattle. Add the Helmet of Fate to your hand, and the Helmet of Fate's a 3-mana spell that transforms a minion into Dr. Fate. So essentially, you can just keep cycling these 2 things back and forth so that you have this infinite supply of 3-mana 3/4s, or, you know, if you're using your Silverhand recruits, it probably costs you 5 mana in some instances to turn them into a 3/4, but you always have a minion to play. Even if your deck has completely ran out of gas, you can just keep cycling this into more stuff. Which is this really interesting value idea where you can take any spare 3 mana and get something a little bit better out of it. It's not going to like overwhelm your opponent because it's delayed in its impact because it's on a Death Rattle, right? So it doesn't snowball out of control. It doesn't deny fatigue. It doesn't do anything crazy, but it still does something pretty cool. Now, interestingly, there's a side benefit for a card like Helmet of Fate, which could actually transform an enemy minion as well. If there's something you're just really worried about, you could use this as a pseudo polymorph effect where you give them a minion that, for instance, doesn't have taunt as well. So it adds a neat little kind of silence, and certainly your opponent could get some upside there because they'll also be able to transform things into Dr. Fates. But against like a big priest, for instance, that'd be totally fine. If they wanted to change all their minions into Dr. Fates, you'd be okay with that. Now, I don't think that's the primary use case for this card. It's just a fun little way to approach it if you get desperate or you need to. But all in all, I just think this feels like a Paladin card. It certainly captures the idea of Dr. Fate's helmet, whoever it goes on becoming Dr. Fate. That's really cool for the character. So all in all, pretty sweet little card. Up next here, we have Mr. Mixes. Card comes from Faroon. 5-mana, 5/5. All cards drawn go to the opposite player, and this is a priest minion. That is the priest banner, not the neutral one. I know they're very confusing and close together. But we have a card here that I think captures Mr. Mxyzptlk quite nicely. He's this kind of fifth dimensional chaotic dude who's just always wreaking havoc on people and sort of a trickster. And the idea of cards going to the wrong player certainly feels rather tricky. Also just a cool implication. Like Priest has all these kind of steal and borrow sort of cards in their toolkit, and Mr. Mxyzptlk here I think would complement that really nicely. The question is, what does your deck look like to support a card like this? You put really bad stuff in your deck so your opponent gets bad or useless stuff or really situational stuff that only you can take advantage of. What does your opponent have that you might want? How long do you keep this card alive? How do you draw a lot of cards? Like you could try to play 3 or 4 card draws immediately after dropping a Mr. Mxyzptlk. All those questions seem really fun to answer, and it seems like building a deck around a card like this would be a really intriguing challenge. And to me, that's a pretty good sign of a card's design. Like that means something is going right, and that's why I'd be pretty excited to see this card in the game. Moving on here, we have another version of the Joker, this time from Lamoyo. An 8-mana, 6/8 neutral minion. At the end of your turn, cast a random trick. And then we've got 4 tricks here. Hungry Teeth, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. Joker in the hole, draw the highest cost card from your deck. Zap, your opponent has Overload 1 for the next turn. Presumably that means each card would have Overload 1, which would be pretty punishing. Anti-tempo sort of thing. And then Laugh Gas, minions opposite to the Joker go dormant for 1 turn. So you have a kind of removal style card or a sap/delay style card there. And some of these are pretty powerful, right? I think the overload aspect would be really powerful. The dormant thing could be really neat if it works. Hungry Teeth is certainly a decent little AoE, maybe not as powerful as some other options. And then drawing a high cost card at turn 8 when you're playing something like the Joker is usually a cool thing to do. So I could see this as kind of a Lich King replacement in a way, but the difference is the Joker's doing something immediately where the Lich King put something in your hand and you had to spend additional mana on it. Now, I don't think most of these effects are as strong as the Lich King's effect. If you compare them 1-to-1, they're usually worse, but they're happening right away, so you don't have to waste any time on your following turn. So different kinds of decks, different scenarios might call for something like the Joker as opposed to Lich King. Other downside for the Joker is no taunt, right? He's not a big 8/8, he's just a 6/8, so a little bit harder to play onto the board, unless perhaps multiple instances of these line up. But then there's the RNG aspect as well. Like, oh, what am I going to get? Is it going to work out well? But that feels so Joker, right? Like, you just can't predict what he's going to be about. Like, who knows what the Joker's going to do. So you just got to take your chances. Usually it's going to be something that's pretty good. Sometimes it might whiff a little bit, but at least you're getting some kind of value return immediately. And then if this thing lives on board for a while, you can create copies, or you summon cheap ones with something like Big Priest, and like boom, the value starts to snowball like crazy, and that's what makes this card so interesting to me. So a great idea here, capturing all the different Joker tricks that are out there. Pretty good take on the character, and I like these big neutral legendary bombs in Hearthstone, and this certainly fits that criteria. So now let's take a look at Billy Batson from Blue Zombie Blood. That's a lot of B's. It's a 4-mana 1/5 neutral legendary with Inspire. I love the Inspire aspect coming back. Transform into a 5/5 Shazam with Immune and Rush until the end of turn. So you play Billy Batson, pretty weak stat line, right? Just a 1/5. That pretty much sucks. But if you can use your hero power at the same time, you get this really nice flexible removal tool with Shazam, who is immune and has Rush, at least for now. So the idea is, right, you play Billy, he inspires, you get the 5/5, you take a cool little trade into something, the Shazam doesn't die, then at the end of the turn, he turns back into a 1/5. So you get this, you capture the fantasy of this indestructible, awesome superhero entity like Shazam, who's just incredibly powerful, while you still get the fragility of his alter ego, Billy Batson, who's just a kid and is rather fragile. And that would be a really hard thing to capture with a card like Shazam. I think if you're just making a Shazam card, like, how do you make it feel awesome enough and powerful enough? But this gets both sides of it, which I think is a very creative thing that not a lot of cards submitted captured of that hero, the superhero fantasy of being a regular dude and then turning into something awesome. This card does that really well while still feeling balanced, keeping the Shazam immunity and Rush aspect in check, because if it stayed like that forever, that'd be too much. But transforming back into your fragile self is really, really cool. So I think this version of Billy Batson does Shazam justice and also does something pretty cool in Hearthstone too. Moving on here, we have Atrocitus from Big Andy No Win. The Red Lanterns are actually surprisingly popular, I would say, in the submissions. We have a few different Red Lantern characters. This one, an 8-mana 6/6 for Warrior. At the start of each turn, all minions attack other random minions, but not Atrocitus. So we have kind of a mass hysteria on a stick here in Warrior, but Atrocitus is essentially immune to this. He's forcing everybody else to be mad at each other and attacking, which is hate and anger, sort of a Red Lantern kind of thing. Everybody hates each other, they attack each other, but he is safe to it. So it's also in a way like a Doomsayer almost, right? It's this board clear that activates at the start of turn. If it goes off, it's probably rather powerful. If it backfires, well, you maybe wasted some resources. But in this case, you still get a nice 6/6 body. And the threat, I think, is even more valuable, because unlike Doomsayer, right, which clears everybody's side of the board, in this case, you would still retain some minions, retain some initiative, and have a very powerful asset on board. So it's this late game Doomsayer that potentially has way, way more upside, and that, of course, is why it's this 8-mana card. Also for Warrior, there is this interesting small implication where you like enraged style effects where your stuff is taking damage. Think about like a Frothing Berserker, for instance. If you could manage to stick a Frothing Berserker, keep it alive, but have a ton of stuff do damage to each other, like a bunch of 1/1s hitting each other, buffing your Frothing Berserker, that's something that Warrior could love as well. So there's this little side benefit, not just necessarily a removal tool, but also this potentially cool damage setup tool, all of which fit the class really nicely and certainly match up with the character too. Now we have the Mildmannered Glasses from Winged Scribe, a 4-mana spell for Paladin. Not many people went away from legendary minions in this one, which certainly made sense if you're trying to do super heroics kind of things. But I liked this one because it went a different way, and it's still a really, really cool card. So the glasses here, of course, a reference to Clark Kent's glasses, Superman's disguise, and they read, give a friendly minion stealth, because that is your disguised alter ego. And then when it breaks stealth, it gains +3/+3. So when Superman takes off the glasses and he comes out of stealth and you realize who he really is, guess what? He is suddenly super buffed. So you've got here kind of an alternate take on a card like Blessing of Kings. The stats aren't there immediately, and they are lower stats, but you also get this advantage of giving something stealth, which of course can be really sneaky and set up some pretty crazy combo opportunities. Think about playing a minion, giving it stealth, it lingers around on board, and then it gets a buff, and then you've got a card like Blessed Champion, right? You can more consistently result in some high roll opportunities because you've got things that are stickier. Just dropping a Blessing of Kings leaves it susceptible to trading. Your opponent can still target it for removal, but if it's got stealth instead, you can do some pretty neat setup ideas. And I think in a buffing class like Paladin, this idea of delaying a buff is fine as long as you have that opportunity to do something cool in the future. That's exactly what Mildmannered Glasses does. So would every deck run this over Blessing of Kings? No. In some cases, the immediate stats would be way better. But would some decks run this over Blessing of Kings? Maybe. It's a possibility. I'd like to see what that deck looks like, and that's what makes this such a cool card. Moving on from Swedish Fish, we have a neutral legendary, the Flash. 6 mana, 6/4, rush. This minion always deals its damage first. And if I'm aware of what people were telling me, this sounds a lot like the effect First Strike from Magic the Gathering. I hope I got that right. It's been a while since I've thought about it. And the idea here is that, in Hearthstone right now, whenever minions attack one another, this damage happens simultaneously. You attack a thing, and the counterattack happens at the exact same time. But with a card like the Flash, based on this wording, and perhaps it would be its own new keyword as it appears to be in Magic the Gathering, he would attack first. So say, for instance, the Flash attacked into a 6/6 minion, right? He would deal 6 damage to the 6/6. That attack would resolve because the Flash deals his damage first. The 6/6 minion would then die, and it would be unable to counterattack because the Flash hit it first. Alternatively, if the Flash attacked a 6/7 minion, say a Boulder Fist Ogre, the Flash would deal its 6 damage to the Boulder Fist Ogre. The Boulder Fist Ogre would then be a 6/1, and then the Boulder Fist Ogre would return the damage to the Flash, and the Flash would die to that trade. So essentially anything with 6 or more health would be able to return its damage. Anything with anything with more than 6 health would be able to return its damage. Anything with 6 or lower health would not be able to return its damage. And I am presuming that in the case of a 6/7 Boulder Fist Ogre, that the Flash would not essentially also get to counterattack, that the attacks would still only be 1 per unit, per minion. So the 6/1 would live when it traded back into the Flash. There would not be 3 total attacks registered. There would still only be 2. They just would not happen simultaneously. So what this means to the Flash is essentially is that he gets to trade with immunity into a lot of different minions as long as they aren't surviving that trade. So killing off 5/5s and anything smaller, 6/6s even, becomes really cool for the Flash. And presumably even on defense, the same thing happens. So it might be difficult for your opponent to remove this with minions as well if they can't in fact survive. So you've got this minion here that's so fast, it's hard for stuff to hit him. He's dodging people and he's attacking before they even realize what's happening, which is clearly very Flash-esque. Now from a gameplay implication standpoint, that might scare some people. I don't actually think this is too good because it's not going to go crazy, right? Like, yes, it gets a free trade in a lot of cases, but a lot of minions have free trades at the moment. As only a 4 health minion, it still dies to so many different kinds of easy removal spells. And in some cases, decks might have trouble trading into it with minions, but even then, it's not really that scary. It's, later in the game is a 6-drop. It doesn't have taunt or anything unless you give it taunt. Then there's more stuff setting it up. Like, I just don't see that this is going to become a problem. It could theoretically if you really, really try to support it, but in most cases, I don't think that would be the strong play nor a competitive meta-relevant sort of thing. So, although a little bit risky, still a completely viable card that seems both solid enough for some decks to run, but not crazy overpowered, and certainly does the character justice. Now let's take a look at Zatanna. We actually already had a previous Zatanna card. This one comes from Sleepy Kitty Aura. It's a 10 mana 5/6, and the battle cry reads, cast all spells you've played this game in reverse order with targets chosen randomly. So we have here kind of like a Yogg-Saron in a way, but a Yogg-Saron that is a little bit more controlled because it's only spells you've cast, not just random spells, right? But they do go in a reverse order, which, as we talked about in our part 1 video, Zatanna casts her spells by reading them backwards. So this captures that idea really nicely for the character. And what that means is there's this really interesting strategic implication for this card. You've got to think about throughout the entire course of the game how you want to play your spells and what order you want to put them in. So for instance, say if you have like 2 fireballs and a flame strike in your deck, right? And you're going to play Zatanna presumably against a board of enemy minions. Then you might want to play your fireballs throughout the course of the game before you play your flame strike because they're going to go in reverse order. So if you played Fireball, Fireball, Flame Strike, the Flame Strike would be cast first off of Zatanna, which might remove the minions on the board so that your fireballs are more likely to hit your opponent's face, although they certainly could, of course, hit your face as well. Another calculation you'd need to take into account. If you did it the other way and you played Flame Strike, Fireball, Fireball, you might send 2 fireballs into minions that were going to die to the Flame Strike anyway. That's an incredibly simplistic example, but you can imagine with all the different spells available to Mage, just how crazy that could be. Now, I will be honest, I think this card is actually a little bit overpowered because there are still just a lot of Mage spells that are universally good. Things like Secrets are just free off of Zatanna. It doesn't really necessarily matter as much when they're played. Flame Strikes are universally good. Certainly, you know, Fireballs can backfire. You can target your own face. But the Arcane Missiles, the Mirror Images, the Secrets, the Blizzards, and the Flame Strikes are all just so good that Zatanna would just be a free way to play a lot of those cards. So we'd probably need to tweak this card a little bit. Maybe it just says cast the last 5 spells you've played this game, or even the last 3 or something, but in reverse order. Those sorts of things to keep that power level in check a little bit, because you can't increase the cost here. Reducing the stats probably doesn't matter much. So I'd have to be a little bit careful about figuring this one out. Maybe it's even like a death rattle effect so that it's delayed and has some answers. Because from a power level standpoint, I think this just like a 12. We need to pull it down like 8, right? 8 or 9 for it to feel healthy. So figure out a way to do that. And I really, really love the design of this card so much that I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit on the balance aspects, because I really do like this idea of capturing Zatanna this way with reverse ordering spells, but it's also just really strategic and rewarding sort of card, which I don't think we have enough of in Hearthstone. So next up here, let's take a look at Darkseid. From Mage Old as Dirt, really the big bad villain, the Thanos, I guess, of the DC universe, for anybody who doesn't know DC all that well and might know Marvel instead. This is a 5-mana 4/4 Warlock legendary with a battle cry. If you have 10 mana crystals, so an Omega-themed card, replace your hero power with Omega Force. And Omega is a pretty key word for Darkseid, so really good choice for the character here. Omega Force is a hero power that's 2 mana, and it reads, hero power, destroy an enemy minion and 2 of your mana crystals. So essentially here, if you're using this Omega Force regularly, right, you're at 10 mana because you know you're there because you played Darkseid, had to be at 10 mana. You go down to 8 mana, right? The next turn you go up to 9, naturally, because that just happens in Hearthstone. You use it again, you go down to 7, then you go up to 8. So if you use this regularly, you are eventually going to get down to a point where you're going to get down to 1 mana at the beginning of a turn. So you have to be kind of careful here with your Omega Force, because clearly it's a pretty powerful thing. A 2 mana removal tool like this that doesn't use a resource in your hand is crazy good, but it comes with this check. I might actually have said reduce 3 of your mana crystals instead of just 2 to accelerate that, because I do think this is a very, very powerful sort of hero power. So I probably would have made that even harder to deal with. But 2 is fine for now. We can talk about balance later. I just like the idea that this captures Darkseid really nicely. Getting the Omega stuff, this overwhelming influence, just this super villain kind of aspect where when you're playing against this hero power, you probably just feel like, oh my god, what do I do? This is so hard. Without being totally crazy, still having some play around, bad against 1/1 token style decks. And it doesn't even start until after turn mana, or excuse me, 10 mana. So I like the idea of this card as the kind of ultimate example of what an Omega card might look like. Up next here is Green Arrow from Faroon, another example of Green Arrow hero, 4 mana 3/6 for Hunter this time. And it reads, whenever you cast a shot spell, add a random shot spell to your hand. And you'll note if you go through Hunter's list of spells, there are a handful of different shot things. You got Arcane Shot, Explosive Shot, Multi-Shot, etc. So you'd be getting one of these, and presumably there could be new ones added to the Hunter pool in any given standard format rotation as well, which is a really cool idea for a couple reasons. One, right, it's some kind of card generation for Hunter that feels very Green Arrow-esque, where he's using all of these different arrows. He's like pulling something out of his quiver, he's using it, and then he's getting another random arrow out of his quiver, and it's like, which one is this? He's using it, right? So you could create some pretty crazy chains, something like Arcane Shot times 6 and do like 12 damage, but more than likely you're going to get some kind of semi-awkward board-based removal tool like that Explosive Shot or Multi-Shot, and it's going to either end your chain or you have to save it for the future. But there's still interesting options that exist, and a card like this creates really cool moments and in-the-minute decisions too, and I think could maybe even start to empower a little bit more of a control Hunter style, because so many of the shot cards do work reactively and defensively, which I would really like to see. We haven't gotten there yet. Rexar was the kind of card that got us close to a control Hunter, a slower Hunter, but it still wasn't really a control deck, right? It didn't rely on reactivity or removing your opponent's stuff. A card like Green Arrow could really be the foundation for that, where you can generate a few extra removal spells, still running survivability in your deck without completely compromising it, trying to fit in all of that removal package, this one card could add 4 or 5 extra resources or tools to your hand that might help you get over the hump. So I would love to see a card like this come into action just to serve as that control hunter basis, and certainly fits Green Arrow along the way, so that's a nice combination. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for the DC Comics custom cards. 10 more amazing cards this time around. We already talked about previously the next custom card competition, but you can find the details in the description of this video as well if you're looking for them. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts on these cards too. What would you change? What would you do differently? Which ones did you like? Which ones did you hate? Share all that in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.